Ladies and gentlemen, why are you smiling so? Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor and Principal, Professor Eugene Barreto, Principal of the Open Campus, Luce Lonsworth, Deputy Principal Clive Landis. I don't see Professor Lamin, but I suspect that he will arrive. Dr. Heather Russell, Associate Professor of English, Florida International University. Dean will be there, Faculty of Humanities and Education. Heads of departments, UWI Press Rep, Mrs. Muirhead. Specially invited guests, those joining us also by live stream, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished friends, all, welcome. My task or my role this evening, as I understand it, one is to welcome you. I just did. So that's one done. The second is to give some very brief introductions, which I'll try to do. And the third is to keep the evening's proceedings on track and within the time frame. I've been instructed that we should be in and out in an hour. In some places, I'm known as a person who speaks very slowly. So there's a problem there. I've also been told that Professor Beckles will speak for no longer than 10 minutes. Highly unlikely. But we'll see how it goes. What I want to do, first of all, is to alert you to the fact that there's been a change in the order. We will have remarks by Dr. Russell first. Then we will have remarks from or other authors. Then we will have the review. Then Professor Beckles will make his intervention. Then we'll have a vote of thanks and the book signing. So that's the change in the order. What I propose to do is to, rather than read the extended bios, I think most of us know the people here, except for Dr. Russell. I will probably read more of hers, but I'll truncate the bios of the others, if that's okay with you and with them. So we'll start with Dr. Russell. I imagine, by the way, that you all know where you are and why you are here. I imagine that you all know that we are here for this reason, that the book is called Rihanna, Barbados World-Gurl. Did I pronounce it?
World-Gurl.
In global political culture. So I don't know if I needed to have said that. Probably for our streaming audience, I probably may need to say and wave. Dr. Russell received her PhD in literature from Rutgers University with a focus in African diaspora literatures. She's currently associate professor and chair designate of the Department of English at Florida International University, where she has taught since 2003. Her research and teaching interests have focused on the intersections of race, gender, class, and post-colonial identity. Her book, Legba Crossing, Narratology in the African Atlantic, published in 2009, was published by the University of Georgia Press. She's, of course, the co-author of the book that we are launching today, and has published in numerous journals on a wide array of subjects related to the Caribbean and African American scholarly concerns, including recent essays on Vybz Kartel and Quentin Tarantino's Django. She is currently at work on her second monograph, Black and White Television, Independence, Popular Culture, and Globalization, 1962 to 1992. Dr. Russell was named one of South Florida's top Black educational leaders for 2014 by Legacy Magazine. And for those of you who are Jamaican, she's a past student of St. Andrew's High School for Girls. Dr. Russell.
Thank you so much. Good evening. You did notice that slippage from popular to political, right? They're always wanting to change our humanities stuff into political science. Anyway, thank you. I'd like to first begin by thanking the Vice Chancellor, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, and his office for sponsoring tonight's event, and of course to Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal of the Cape Hill campus for hosting us. Special thanks as well to Professor Aon Kamisha for quickly springing into action and organizing this evening's event. And I must say I'm very much looking forward to sitting back and hearing from Dr. Haynes to see whether or not what we think we did with this book was in fact what we did. So I want to thank everyone for coming. I thought I might just spend a couple minutes sharing a little bit about the genesis of the book and my work on Rihanna, which emerged more broadly from my work in literature, politics, economics, gender representation in the Caribbean. Sir Hilary and I will probably have different versions of the genesis of this book, but he is the historian in the collaboration, and of course we allow our historians their official version. As a literary critic, we all know that there are multiple versions of the truth, and so this is my version of what happened. I was actually in Brazil in 2007, and I was presenting on a panel on Caribbean women and music. And I was working on feminist extraordinaire reggae musician Tanya Stephens. Those of you who don't know, she, of course, was made famous, or we might say infamous, for It's a Pity. And have you ever stopped to ask, will make a girl cheat? And those kinds of very, very pro-feminist lyrics. And I was on a panel that was being organized by Professor Ifiona Fulani, who was actually working on a collection that the University of the West Indies Press ended up publishing called Archipelagos of Sound. And she wanted the Stephens piece for it. But it had been promised to another collection that was titled Caribbean Erotic, that was edited by Opal Palmer Adisa and Donna as a Weir-Soley. And so I had to beg out of the project. She called me 2 weeks later and she said, what about a piece on Rihanna? And I said, Rihanna? What would I possibly have to say? Now, at that time, I should say that Rihanna was maybe 2 years on the scene. And Good Girl Gone Bad had recently been published, but I was also really not into pop music. I'm still really not that much into pop music. If you log into my iTunes, you'll probably find an eclectic mix anywhere from Nina Simone to, of course, Vybz Kartel, John Coltrane, and even Green Day and Coldplay. No Beyonce, no Miley, no Justin Bieber, not even Sorry. Not even Sorry makes the cut. So I said, let me think about it. So I started to do a little bit of research and a little bit of reading and listening about and to this emergent Barbadian superstar. And the more I listened, especially to Good Girl Gone Bad, and the more I read about the various national and regional discourses in the Caribbean, the more fascinated I became. What I found most interesting was Rihanna's full embrace simultaneously of both her mainstream popular appeal and her unabashed insistence on being openly and unequivocally Barbadian, her diasporic citizenship, so to speak. But as the first Barbadian superstar of such magnitude, she implicitly carries the burden, the sheer weight of representing the entire nation, willingly or not. For it is especially true in the case of Black people that in the absence of multiple diverse images, the one is always both representative and representation. So these were my initial preoccupations, and I called Fiona back and I said, yes, I'll do it. So Riri became added to my iTunes. I do have most of her albums, including her most recent one, Auntie, and if you want to talk about it after, I'm happy to talk about it. So the edited collection, Archipelagos of Sound, edited by Fiona Falani, came out, and that includes my first Rihanna essay. And that took some time to come out. In the meantime, the Caribbean Studies Association was being held here in Barbados in 2010. So I reached out to Professor Beckles, who had been extremely instrumental in bringing the reparations discourse to South Florida, to see if he had any ideas about potential panelists at Cave Hill working in cultural studies and in other areas that might be interested in contributing. And we shall hear from some of our esteemed panelists this evening, so I'm not going to say too much about their stellar contributions. So we held the first academic panel on Rihanna at the CSA in 2010 here in Barbados. And then the first academic article, at least so I'm told, came out on Rihanna, came out in Archipelagos of Sound, and the rest, as they say, is history. Professor Beckles, who had attended the CSA session, and I had a conversation after, and we thought that, yes, this would be a worthwhile project to continue to pursue, and so we began the hard work of co-editing this volume. So just a couple of things that we thought were important. We thought it was very important to invite scholars to contribute from different disciplines located in Barbados, in the Caribbean, and for those of us like me located in the United States, to seek scholars who are ideologically positioned in the global South, in the hopes of staging an early intervention in the discourse surrounding Rihanna, with full awareness of the ways in which artists from the Black diaspora oftentimes get misappropriated and mispresented by others. Now, I think it's important to note, and Professor Haynes will perhaps have more to say about this, that the essays collected were not some kind of facile endorsement of her celebrity. On the contrary, the contributors have widely ranging, and in some cases, quite divergent views on issues like artistic freedom, on the degree to which Rihanna can be read as radical feminist, on the impact of her emergence on the Barbadian cultural landscape. Despite this diversity of perspectives, though, our aim was to situate Rihanna as both artist and symbol in historical, social, political, economic, and cultural contexts, illuminating what we hoped would be a critically relevant exchange. For me in particular, it was important to foreground the ways in which gender and sexuality are performances that cut across multiple sites of national and transnational commercial vectors. In other words, who, how, where, and for whom one performs are tied to all kinds of issues that we hope that the book provokes. In this regard, issues of gender and sexuality, especially moments like Rihanna's 2007 proclamation of her liberation as a good girl gone bad, are important, for they represent an intentional act of challenging the patriarchal imposition of the Madonna-whore binary, the biblically rooted idea that women are either good girls or bad girls, Jezebels or Madonnas. These ideas, although devastating for all women, have particular resonance for women of color, especially those emerging from the economies of plantation slavery. So Rihanna, we would suggest, has continued to not only deconstruct, but to totally obliterate the binary. It was also important to both of us as editors to challenge the simplistic reading of Barbados as socially conservative, the Little Britain, as it were, of the Caribbean, who could never produce a Rihanna. In fact, we would suggest, and as several of our contributors do, that Rihanna's unapologetic affirmation of black women's right to unfettered sexual mobility and expression, her highly publicized challenges to global racism, and her radical nonconformity all mark her as 100% Bayesian. Can I get an amen? In closing then, it was a wonderful journey working on Rihanna, Barbados World-Gurl in global popular culture. I'd like to publicly thank my collaborator, Sir Hilary, and the amazing cadre of scholars who worked really diligently through the many incarnations of the collection. And I will end by saying it is extremely meaningful to me for us to be having our launch of our book, first launch, here at Cave Hill. So thank you very much.
Okay, folks, I'm going to suggest that I read 2 or 3 sentences for each of the authors who are with us. And of course, I will not read sentences for those who are not with us, but we shall acknowledge them. And I'll do that as soon as you have given another round of applause for this round. And they'll come in the order in which I read them. Curwen Best did his undergraduate degree and MPhil at UWI Cave Hill before going on to the University of Birmingham to read for his PhD. He joined the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, in the mid-1990s as assistant lecturer. He pioneered the teaching of popular culture at Cave Hill while also conducting frontier research on facets of Caribbean and Western culture. The findings of this research are contained in his major publications. He is currently Professor of Popular Culture and Literary Studies at Cave Hill. He will be followed by Aon Kamisha, who's senior lecturer in cultural studies at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. He completed his PhD in social and political thought at York University in Toronto and was in 2007-2008 postdoctoral fellow in the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern University. His current work is a study of coloniality, cultural citizenship, and freedom in the contemporary Anglophone Caribbean. And Curwen will be followed by Aaron would be followed by Dr. Don Marshall. The copy says Don D. Marshall acquired a PhD. I would like to change that to Don D. Marshall earned a PhD in international political economy from the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK in 1996. He was promoted senior fellow in August of 2005, and he is currently director of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute. His current research projects focus on the globalization phenomena, offshore financial centers, scientific finance as a discourse, industrial policy issues, and democracy and governance in the Eastern Caribbean. We will start with Curwen.
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies. Good evening to everyone. All protocol being established. Let me say it's really certainly very good to be here. Just a few words really about my chapter, which is titled something like She Dances on the Holodeck. You know, for some of you perhaps doesn't mean a thing. For others of you who perhaps watch Star Trek and so on, yeah, you know, yes, exactly, you know. You know, basically then the chapter, when I'm thinking about the chapter, I'm thinking about statement I kind of made in a book that I did just a few years ago, perhaps, on the politics of Caribbean cyberculture, where I suggested that Caribbean culture, as we have known it traditionally, died somehow in the decade of the 1990s, you know. And when I made that statement, I didn't want big rocks coming my way. I was only trying really to say in a very, you know, dramatic and perhaps an artistic and provocative way as well, that our society has and had changed in the decade of the 1990s. And in a sense, we had moved, if we trace the kind of transition from analog and maybe technologies and methodologies and so on, we can perhaps say that something was happening mid-80s, late 90s in the arena of pop music and film and so on, with the technologies and the tools being used. And that certainly in the, when we reached the 1990s, you know, something new had been happening. And certainly by late 1990s, many of us were taking technologies home to live with us. And that is an important statement, if only because I'm suggesting that individuals who were born around the time of Rihanna were themselves, you know, certainly by the late 90s and early 2000s, already embedded in this arena of cyberculture. And that's, I think, a very important point to make. And following on from that, I'm wanting us to think about the realities of how our culture has shifted. And one of the things that my chapter also, perhaps as a subtext, is doing is asking us to think about how our culture has transitioned, and also to think about the techniques, the tools, the methodologies, and indeed the strategies, reading strategies and so on, and the kind of academic approaches that we bring to an examination of our culture. One of the things I say is that you know, our culture has transitioned. We are now in a digital arena of virtuality and so on. But much of our critique, I'm not knocking my colleagues, you know, because all work is important, I believe. But the point I make, you know, given my own emphasis, is that there's a need as well for our techniques and our strategies to also come into, you know, this new arena and to engage in some of the what I call multi-track readings of our culture and our technologies. And as my students were saying to me just a few weeks ago in pop culture studies, you know, they were lamenting the fact that we do not have the kinds of texts that talk to us about individuals like Rihanna and so on, about our smartphones that live with us and so on. What do these things mean to us? And in a sense, my chapter grapples with a bit of that. But finally, very finally, I want to say that one of the things that I use then as a kind of a metaphor, because I suggest that in the same way that our culture has transitioned into the kind of digital, you know, digitized kinds of realities and virtual realities and so on, that we have to ourselves be perhaps thinking of new metaphors that we use as academics and even as thinkers that will help us to discuss, you know, who we are. I know the Prospero Caliban story and is very important, Crusoe Friday as well, but I suggest that something like the holodeck, you know, could also be used. And the holodeck, very simply, as I conclude, is in Star Trek lore or Star Trek terminology, in the Star Trek universe. It is really a virtual reality space, you know, where characters go into and you say, if this were a holodeck, for example, I would say, computer, give me the year 1966. And somehow we would be transformed there because, you know, there would be these force fields, replicated matter, transported matter, and all the other force fields and tractor beams and so on would somehow bring that into being, and we would be here. So I use that simply as a metaphor, as an entry point for talking about Rihanna and for suggesting that indeed the arena in which she's embedded, and which we also, by the way, are embedded, is in a sense, you know, it is kind of anticipating that kind of reality. And my very final sentence, there's a semicolon there, is that those of you who are contemplating buying maybe for your young ones, your grands and so on, some of the wearables, you know, the Oculus, virtual reality piece, you know, that is perhaps where we're going. So simply put then, I use the metaphor of the holodeck as a way of talking about Rihanna, talking about embeddedness in virtual reality and so on. I think it's a pretty okay piece, you know, but I want you to go and read. Don't trust me. Go take a read. Thank you very much, and I thank the editors for giving the opportunity.
Yes. So Good to see all of you here today. My chapter is titled Rihanna and Bayesian Respectability, and there is, of course, a story about how I came to write it. I was originally asked by Heather to write an article for the collection in 2011, and I demurred quickly. The way in which you are very tactful, but at the same time you're really saying no. And that is because despite my great respect for the work that Heather has done, that essay that you actually did on Tanya Stevens, I teach every year my Black Popular Culture course, and the students like it quite a lot. I found myself in a situation in which I said I can't do it because I don't write on popular culture. I see myself as somebody who writes on intellectual history, social and political thought, these kinds of issues. I don't write on popular culture. I'm not sure what I would say about Rihanna. I know how important Rihanna is. When I went home to Tanzania, actually, for the first time in 30 years, in December 2006, I spent all Year's Day, the very first day I was in Tanzania, at a bar in Dar es Salaam. And what was on the wall of the bar? Well, music videos were streaming of Rihanna, Rihanna's performances. And I thought, wow, you know, Rihanna is really all around the world. So I had this problem, though, because back to 2011, I'm teaching cultural studies at the University of West Indies Gayville campus, and it's bugging me, even though I told Heather no. I'm saying, how is it that I cannot have anything to say about the most prominent and the best-known citizen of this country since Sir Garfield Sobers? And I teach cultural studies, and I am a Barbadian citizen. So I had a problem. However, when one has a problem, sometimes one receives a gift. And I got a gift in November 2011, in which I looked at the front page of my Sunday Sun, and a man I've never met, a Bishop Marlon Husbands, gave me this wonderful gift. He had launched into this verbal salvo against Rihanna, and he, to quote him, his wider target was I quote, the level of indiscipline, immorality, and homosexuality in Barbados. He accused Rihanna as, quote again, always doing foolishness. And he said that she was an inappropriate role model for Barbadian youth and unfit to be a cultural ambassador for Barbados. And I was there, wow, that is so perfect. I now know what I'm going to write about, okay? And I called Heather immediately, and I left a message on her answering machine, and I said, Heather, right, so this is what I'm going to do. My essay is going to be called Rihanna and Bayesian Respectability. And I'm going to have the chance then of going through all of the criticisms and that have been made by the Caribbean radical intelligentsia of the Caribbean elites and the Caribbean middle classes, since Fanon and James right down to our time. I put down the phone and I went back to sleep or something, and Heather, very eager and quick to secure me, sent me an email saying, fine, yes, so the deadline date is X. And I was like, shoot, man, you know? I shouldn't have done that. I should have thought through it again, you know? Now I'm committed to writing this essay. So I wrote the essay. It was really a fascinating project because the thing about writing, I've found, is that writing is a very hard exercise every time you're writing every single essay. And practically every single essay I've written and published, I didn't know for sure that I was actually going to finish it. But what happens is that towards the end, it all swoops together like a jigsaw. You're writing the beginning, you're writing the end, you're writing part in the middle. You do not write from the beginning to the end. You're doing all of this stuff. It swoops together, you have it there, and then you send it off and you try to ignore what the reviewers say about your essay and keep the spirit of it still alive in what is published, even though they are drawing you in different directions. So again, I'd like to thank both Professor Sir Hilary Beckles and Professor Russell for taking my mind in a new direction. I now actually think that I have more to share and more to say than I did before. And I think that as someone who writes and thinks for a living, I cannot ask for any more. Thank you very much.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Special greetings to the editors, Sir Hilary and Heather. I thank you for inviting me to be a part of this wonderful collection. My story isn't as colorful, but there were some events. The first one being a chance occasion when I went to the 3Ws Oval here. I was just beyond the door, and I met Sir Hilary as we were watching a game involving the CCC team, combined campuses and colleges playing a first-class game. And I sat next to Sir Hilary, and soon into conversation, he said, Donna, I want you to consider writing a chapter on a book where we're going to feature Rihanna. I am a political scientist trained in international political economy. Yes, you would have heard Harkley mention that I have an interest in matters to do with globalization. Looking at an unruly subject like Rihanna, and I say unruly with all the admiration that literary critics would use, and trying to ground her on the problematics of territory, identity, belongingness, and the sense to in which the cultural effect of globalization really is the disregard of territorial sovereignty, right? And that's going through my head, and I'm thinking as I sit next to Sir Hilary, maybe I'll go with this angle, but I don't know if I'll find the time to fit Rihanna in. You understand? I'm fascinated with globalization. I'm thinking about it as the disregard of territorial sovereignty. And I'm aware that I'm in that eclipse generation that has still this tie of belongingness to the nation and still this sense of the cosmopolitan. And that my daughter, who is 17 years old, is fully on the other side, where this disregard for territorial sovereignty is a live thing with the WhatsApp and everything. Her friends are, she has a cousin that is in Ohio, in the University of Ohio, and her world is so connected that it's immediate. So I thought, well, I'll approach this project. And then some of my good friends in the political science department decided on the occasion that I was not attending CSA to let my good friend Hilburn Watson know when he asked, so what is Don doing? I'm not seeing him here. They said to him behind my back, boy, he ain't doing IPE, which is International Political Economy. He's doing a work on Rihanna. And Hilburn swore like a pirate, right? Someone said, I'm going to tell him. He said, you tell him this for me. What is he doing with this scholarship? What's this thing about Rihanna that he's doing? Anyway, Aaron is right. You start writing, and you get these gifts. And there were some moments where Rihanna was seeking to defend her use of the C word, and there was some reaction in the public domain. Then there was the release of one or two of the, particularly the Man Down video was the one that struck me. The conversations I had with close colleagues when there's a shocking scene where she shoots the attacker, the would-be rapist, dead in public. And I thought that there's a seriousness to the politics and representation around Rihanna and what she's saying about her public outrage when it comes to bodily autonomy and any silly notion that a woman invites rape by the way in which she was sensuously dancing and so on in the scenes prior. And I have to pay tribute to Dr. Halima Deschamps, who I spoke to seriously about looking at the feminist sensibilities of Rihanna. And then I started to make some connections. And hopefully when you see the chapter, Jeremy, that's why I had to bring the book. Rihanna as global icon and Caribbean threshold figure. You will see connections being made across various streams. One talks about youth culture, I see her as an updated rebel, and I think she also encapsulates the best of what we understand to be Caribbean youth culture in terms of her disregard for conformity. I also think she represents she's not a feminazi. I heard that term being utilized to describe some mistaken notion of early feminists as men haters. She's certainly someone that is very much concerned about manliness when she searches for love and affection, and yet she refers to herself as a man at work when she's referring to her fierce preparation and the rigor she puts into every project she puts her hand on. And that's complex, because the man at work, when she uses that term, she ends up talking about the matriarchs in her household, her grandmother, her mother, and so on, and not really about men, which tells you a lot about Caribbean culture too, right? And so I speak to this, and I speak to Fanon's notion of the semi-consciousness that governs persons coming out of the colonial experience, that violent colonial experience, and I go on to make other connections. But I want you to know that there was a spirit running through me as I wrote this, and so I'm going to touch on the spiritual here, and I thought a lot about the figure that comes before her, not Bob Marley, but Grace Jones. I thought of Grace Jones as I was writing, because Grace Jones is in fact perhaps the first Caribbean global icon. Of course, Rihanna has a greater reach with the technology of the times, but you could well recognize how she was treated in the press, Grace Jones. I actually contributed only 2 lines to Grace Jones in this chapter, but I kept thinking of her spirit and her example, and the fact that Rihanna walks into the same space, does a bit more conquering, engages the messiness of the space, and comes out defining herself on her terms. Thank you.
I think we're doing very, very good on time. One of the things that I'm instructed I'm supposed to do is, where and when necessary, to instruct you to applaud again for these 3 gentlemen. It's quiz time. And there are no prizes, but I'm just curious to know how many of you have heard American Oxygen. That's not bad. That's quite good. That's quite good. Very good. There are no prizes. But for those of you who have not heard it, your prize would be to go and hear it. We are going to ask our reviewer, Dr. Haynes, to speak to us. Dr. Haynes is temporary lecturer at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies, Nitabara Unit. She holds a PhD in Gender and Development Studies from the University of the West Indies, and was in 2011 Center for Gender Excellence visiting scholar at Linköping University, Sweden. Her research is animated by concerns about knowledge and power in the production of injustices and inequalities. Tanya researches primarily in the area of Caribbean feminism and Caribbean feminist thought, and has also conducted research on gender-based violence and men's organizations. Tanya's work has been published in Small Acts, Global Public Health, Love and Power, Caribbean Discourses in Gender, which is the text edited by our principal. She's also been published in the Caribbean Writer and in Anthurium. Let's welcome Dr. Haynes.
It's a bit tall. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Harclay, for that introduction. Even though I must say that I think that when the organizers asked me to review the book, that my main qualification was the fact that I also grew up in Westbury Road, as did Rihanna. But thank you to the organizers for inviting me to do this. I really did enjoy the book, and I have a lot to say about it. And let me just say that over the weekend, I came on campus to get the reading done and get the review written. I came to my office only to discover that the office was being painted. But nonetheless, I went inside, I got the computer on, but the two guys who were doing the painting were big Rihanna fans, and they were actually blasting hit after hit after hit, and I could not get anything done. And I remember Rihanna saying, she would annoy her neighbors with her singing. Well, that sonic disturbance is still continuing. Nonetheless, I hope that I can share with you a few critical comments about my own readings and interpretations of this text. So critics have already declared that Rihanna's 8th studio album signals her transition from pop star to legacy act, in that even if she never records another song, and we know that given her work ethic that is not the case, but her influence will be both lasting and undeniable. One of the world's best-selling artists of all times, this digital songs artist of the 2000s decade embodies and skillfully exploits the media-saturated times in which she came of age. It seems surprising that someone of such monumental skill and influence who attracts and creates considerable media should have taken such a long time to receive scholarly attention. Nonetheless, I think it is particularly fitting that the first scholarly work on the Caribbean's most successful artist of all time should emerge from the region's premier academic institution, the University of the West Indies. Thank you. So Rihanna, Barbados, World-Gurl in Global Popular Culture is a brilliant book. And I'm saying that you can always trust me to be honest. When I told Stefan, who's here in the audience, that I really love the book, he said, I know that Tanya doesn't like anything, so she loves the book. It has to be good. And the book it avoids the tendency at least in Caribbean cultural studies analysis, to kind of assume that the academic conveys some sort of validity and legitimacy to the popular. And perhaps because it would be untenable to even come with that kind of framing to Rihanna, to think about Rihanna, the work instead follows Rihanna's lead, I would say, as researchers take seriously digital archives, recognizing the significance of digital culture, which any work animated by Rihanna or concerned with contemporary culture must do. And as Curwen mentioned, he has been making the case for the validity of attention to this digital noise, given the shift that he said in understanding Caribbean culture since the 90s. And for me, what is most important about the work is the generative space it creates for the thinking and creativity of others. So when I like a piece of work, it's because it also generates your own ideas and has space in it for your own thinking and creativity. And no doubt many of the chapters in the collection are destined to become foundational readings in their areas of focus, highly elusive and in conversation with both popular and academic dialogue. This stellar work is destined to become a classic of Caribbean cultural studies and of cultural scholarship that takes seriously the popular influence of globalization's tastemakers. And it is definitely up to the task of intellectual ingenuity demanded by its subject. And so first I want to talk about collectively what the collection does, and then I'm going to speak a bit more specifically about some of the individual chapters, and I promise that I will not go past the time that they have given to me. So collectively, the chapters in the work offer a promiscuous range of perspectives which focus on visuality, on sound, political economy, nation, diaspora, feminist theory, geography, history, youth culture, life writing, psychology, intimate partner violence, science fiction, and fashion. They contribute to an understanding of celebrity, globalization, media, and popular culture. The collection refigures and extends key concepts and debates in Caribbean cultural studies like creolization, reputation and respectability, and cultural resistance. And for me, it does the same thing for some of the foundational concepts in feminist theory, like notions of public and private. It theorizes Barbadian culture, offering up refreshing insights on the assertion that Barbados lacks a distinctive cultural identity. Writers explore Bajan middle-class respectability, tourism, and post-colonial economic and identity anxieties. And with keen attention to gender, race, and class, it adds the notion of play to complicate the ways in which these in which these are often deployed. And for me, as someone working in gender studies, you're always working gender, race, class in a way that can be a bit tired, and it's interesting to see what the scholars in the book are doing with that. So Dominican-American writer Junot Diaz talks about space travel as the only way to make sense of his experience of leaving the rural Dominican Republic, where he talks about his grandmother as growing up in these kind of proto-slavery conditions and arriving in urban US in New Jersey. And one may assume that the notion of space travel, of leaving one world and arriving in a completely new and alien one, would be an apt metaphor for thinking of Rihanna's roots in the urban village of Westbury Road and her meteoric rise to global pop star dominance. However, the writers in this collection would certainly disagree. Hilary Beckles, for example, in his opening chapter, Westbury Writes Back, offers a geography and historicization which locates Rihanna within a larger history of Barbadian greats and sees Westbury as coextensive with Caribbean cities in the global north. Her rise, at once atypical, is not unfathomable. Her success is no science fiction, even as making sense of all the questions thrown up by her representations and reception demand new metaphors, as Curwen best argued. And for me, the work as a whole, the collection, is most valuable where it refuses to even assume that there could be any easy reading of Rihanna, and it renders Rihanna as unmanageable as she is. And I'm thinking here, for example, of Don Marshall's chapter where he makes, for me, was an interesting argument in thinking of how in some ways Rihanna subverts, refuses, complicates the privileges of brown femininity even as she cashes in by rejecting mainstream feminine representation through, for example, her androgyny that she displays sometimes and rejection of passive femininity. And here for me, I see his analysis as extending that of Caribbean feminist scholars such as Kamala Kempadu, Patricia Muhammad, Omiseki, Natasha Tinsley, and Heather Russell in the same volume, who have interrogated a black female sexuality that is historically imagined in very pejorative, animalistic terms, and a brown one humanized, sexualized, feminized, and commoditized for white male consumption. And here, contributors extend our understandings of the intersecting relations of gender, race, color, and commodification. Thinking of Rihanna's skillful politics of fashion reveals not just a kind of resistance that will ultimately reaffirm the center as center, but a politics of play that is not as easily contained and therefore perhaps not as easily subverted. Marshall presents a multiply imbricated, complex, multi-layered reading while invoking gender, race, class, sexuality, revealing them to be analytically tired, to paraphrase Patricia Muhammad, which is not to say useless, for understanding what Marshall calls Rihanna's allegorical meanings. But locating his inquiry within youth culture and mobilizing play, he offers a nuanced way of deploying these analytically tired categories of feminist analysis. His chapter is followed by that of Mike Alleyne, which is one of my favorite chapters in the collection, and I think it's a unique contribution to the collection in that he focuses specifically on Rihanna's song, and also he makes a political economy analysis of that song. And here, Alleyne interrogates the sonic distinctiveness of Barbados, or lack thereof. So is there any such a thing as a unique Barbadian sound? I meant to kind of have this discussion with Stefan, my colleague from Cultural Studies, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him about it, but I can tell you what Alleyne had to say on that question. And here he's returning again to this question of Barbados as Little England, as lacking culture, which is asked and explored differently in the opening chapter by Sir Hilary. And it's also a question to which Aon Kamisha also returns, but without recourse to any kind of an untenable nationalism. And for me, one of the questions that this volume itself poses is this perennial one that Barbadians also have about what exactly is Barbadian culture. And Alleyne historicizes the Barbadian music industry and complicates this notion that Rihanna might somehow be challenging this alleged lack of a Bajan sonic identity, and he sees her success as less of a challenge to that idea and more of a complication of it. He examines what Rihanna's success mean and what it does not mean, and he's very critical about what her success does not mean for a Barbadian music industry and for Barbadian artists. And he offers a political economy analysis which lays bare just how hits are made, the process of making a hit. And his work serves as a welcome corrective to dominant methodologies in cultural studies which privilege representation above the political economy in which those representations are created. Okay. And Alleyne's chapter is followed by that of Esther Jones, where she theorizes celebrity, refiguring notions of public and private, and making a convincing argument for viewing Rihanna's discography as a form of life writing. And Esther is coming from a literary background. But she does a visual analysis of Rihanna's album covers, arguing that Rihanna narrates or crafts her life and identity through her discography and through her body, refusing claims from the nation and from fans over her self-representation and refusing the narrative made from the machine. And it represents one of the closest readings of Rihanna in the collection. And now I want to talk a bit about Curwen's piece, which I also enjoy and which I felt was a key chapter in there that seemed to be questioning the very premise of some of the other chapters in the volumes, in the way that he was suggesting that all that is available to us is this holodeck version of Rihanna, as he creates new metaphors for understanding Caribbean culture. And this creative clash of perspectives, so in my mind, what is a strength of the collection is the way in which a lot of the pieces can be read productively against each other. Another brilliant chapter by Aon Kamisha offers a unique insight into our understanding of the Caribbean middle class. And in a sense, he updates how we have come to think about the Caribbean middle class by focusing on this question of entrepreneurship and on what state interest in Rihanna itself represents. And for me, his is the most powerful example of dialogue with other Caribbean scholars because he's working specifically in Caribbean political thought. So he's drawing in insights from a range of Caribbean scholars to produce, which drives the analysis and produces its conceptual richness. So here, Aon argues that the black middle class is attracted to Rihanna's triumphant success in global capital, her entrepreneurship, but they themselves cannot inhabit the kind of freedom that her money can buy. Thus, their ambivalence towards her entrepreneurship of the self, or her playful self-fashioning and sexual expression. And herein lies the middle class anxieties of what Rihanna represents that are the source of local criticism, though I must say that, at least from my vantage point, local criticism of Rihanna is increasingly more and more irrelevant, but also it is decreasingly virulent. Like, people have come around to realize that calling in a call-in program and complaining that Rihanna has a tattoo is ridiculous. And Aon situates anxieties about Rihanna within middle class anxieties of Barbados in neoliberal times. Aaron, like Marshall, adds the importance of play to the other lenses of race, class, and gender for making sense of Rihanna's representations and receptions. For me, it is one of the finest pieces in the collection because of the extensive range of scholars with whom Aaron places his work in dialogue to produce new insights on Barbadian respectability, the middle class, and neoliberal contradictions in the regions. The collection is rounded out by Heather Russell's chapter entitled Rihanna, Diaspora Citizen, Bajan Daughter, Global Superstar. And as she mentioned, an earlier version of this work appeared in 2012, making Heather one of the earliest, scholarly works on Rihanna. And conceptually, she imagines Rihanna as diaspora citizen, magnifying the tension between the national and the transnational, and offering up a way of framing the entire collection itself. Russell deftly explores the tensions between and among Rihanna as artist, as commodity, and as symbol of national pride. So just to conclude, I think the collection is a must-read for anyone interested in understanding global circuits of media, music, and bodies, and our own anxieties around belonging, identity, gender, sexuality, and race in these media saturated times. I think there's something there for everyone, for the Rihanna Navy who want to learn a bit more about Rihanna's home, and the cultural critics who will benefit from the extended critical vocabulary now made available to them, for students of globalization, of diaspora, political economy, media and cultural studies, feminist and gender studies, for Caribbean and Caribbean scholars across the disciplines. Buy the book. Thank you.
I'm told that free copies would be made available to people who have featured prominently in the criticism of Rihanna over there. Ladies and gentlemen, I've sought permission and I have been given permission to introduce our Vice Chancellor as the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies.
Thank you so much, Harclyde. There's something in it for everyone. I'm sure that each and every one of you would wish me to contest my co-editor's concept of the origins. I think that would be an appropriate thing to do, to challenge her narrative of the origins, simply on the basis that she believed that the historical timeline and sequence of events ought to give way to the constructions of literary critics. And let me say this. In one of her songs, which I heard a part of on the radio, I think she was commenting on a knight on a horse coming to rescue. And then he discovered that the horse was sent for him. So, Heather, you are, in my judgment, the first person to look at the Rihanna phenomena in a serious intellectual way. I celebrated that. I respect that. That is important. Heather, of course, has a responsibility to do these things. She is part of the pedigree of the UWI's journey because her father was one of the distinguished intellectuals of UWI. So she's a second generation. And that gives her a special responsibility to stand up. Heather and I spoke at length about the parameters of such a project. The Barbadianness is a part of it. The Caribbeanness is a part of it. She learned so much of her music in the Jamaican context. Her Trinidadian calypso influence is so strong. She's a Caribbean artist from Barbados. But Barbados is the world's first global village of the 17th century, and that has a certain power of history attached to it, that to be Barbadian is to be global, because this island was invented by globalization in its first phase. So the historical imagination places Rihanna, therefore, in that continuum. My role was to use my institutional authority to bring some young K-Phil academics who are very unruly into order. They would not say this, but they were unruly in responding to editorial timelines. And I would like to imagine that when they receive short, turt letters from their principal, that in fact he was wearing two hats. But it was wonderful to, in my generation, to be intellectually at peace with a younger generation of brilliant scholars. That means a lot to me. And to use my good offices to create an environment within which they can break down their own disciplinary barriers and do new and creative and innovative things. I did, however, fail to rein in the unruliness of Eudine Barreto, who I did my utmost to persuade to make a contribution. But she was on the verge of becoming principal, and I had lost my authority over her. And I regret, Eudine, that you are not a part of this collection. And each time I pick it up, I do wish that you were here. Book 2. Rihanna is a very good friend of my second son, and I saw her grow up. And there is therefore a certain special affinity I have for her as a young girl who came out of a school, and I remember meeting her within that context. And so that brought another layer of responsibility and deep and very profound respect. This volume undoubtedly is part of what has been described as that collective act of responsibility within our academy to participate in the shaping of a discourse or discourses that are relevant to our times. I was fully aware of that, and the conversations with Heather, placing this within the Caribbean diaspora global context, shaping the internal contours of the collection, all of these layers of responsibility are there. I would like to say something about the cover of this book, but I cannot speak to the cover of the book because most of you I do not see have a copy of this book in your hand. And I would like the marketing officer of UB Press to bring a book and place in the hands of everyone who is not in possession of a copy so that they will know what I'm speaking about. This, of course, is a ploy to get you to buy the book, but don't worry. that is not important. What I'm going to say has some integrity. So I want you to bring a bundle of books and place in the hands of at least 10 or 15 people. Yeah. So that they can follow me on the next point I wish to make. It's very clever. It's a very clever way of, very clever. And by the way, the point is that each of you is invested with integrity, and you will leave your money. You will leave your money as you go. No, you will not return the book. To view is to purchase. Now, when this collection was completed, I sent the manuscript to a brilliant young Caribbean American Barbadian girl, and I asked her to design a cover for this book. I did not believe the book should just have a cover that emerges from an internet search of reproduced graphic design. And this young lady read this book and, in my view, brilliantly captures the content of the collection. This young lady, of course, is my niece, who I raised up. And she is a brilliant young artist operating in New York with her own studios, but came up on this island, imagining cane leaves, plantations, seas, oceans, music. I think that my niece, who's watching this live stream, did a great job, and good girl. Good girl. The lawyers argued that we could not use an image of Rihanna on the book because it's intellectual property rights and all of those issues. And this was also a very creative way of getting to the source. We are here in a cricket environment, and therefore I need to say something about cricket. It's important. She is from the same community as Sir Everton Weekes, who 30 years before she was born was classified globally as the greatest batsman in the world. My concern was to explain how one street can produce two persons who are the greatest in the world. A street within a certain interpretation of globalization is of no relevance to a greater world. My argument in the book is that, on the contrary, Westbury is the most globalized of streets in the global world. Everything that you wish to find in the world, you will find in Westbury. And that includes Tonya. It's a phenomenal street. On the one hand, on the one end is Spring Garden, arguably the most famous street in Barbados in the wider world, Spring Garden. Everyone knows the Spring Garden. And on the other hand, there is a cemetery. And there is a relationship between these things, Curwen. There is a relationship between these things because Westbury Street 200 years ago was in fact the heart of the Westbury sugar plantation. And if you enter the archives here in Blackrock and you read the documents on Westbury Plantation, you can be transported right back today, since you are a Star Trek man and you want to be beamed across. want to be beamed across time, you go to the Blackrock Archive and go into the 18th century and read about Westbury. The archives are filled with runaway slaves from Westbury. Africans always running away. There was this persistence of running away. It's all Rihanna has done. That's what she's done. She just run away. She's a maroon. She's at large. She is a product of Westbury's history. I interviewed a lot of people on Westbury about Everton Weeks and about Rihanna. Both of them had a desire to enter Kensington Oval and master it. She had the desire to enter Kensington Oval and master it. And I was there when she did, when she ended her world tour at Kensington Oval and took possession of it as Everton Weeks had done, all in the 40s and 50s. The comparisons of consciousness, time, and space, precisely because for them, the biggest symbol of a global space in their community was Kensington Oval. That was the world space in their space, and they all wanted to go in there and master it. The question, therefore, is why would children, why would little working class, poor, barefooted children wish to master a world space? Wish to enter a world space, dominate it, control it, and rule it, and be the best at it, and then proceed to do it. Proceed to do it. Now, globalization for me has always been a double-edged sword. It's best understood that way because, on the one hand, it speaks to borderlessness, openness, and all of those flattening of space. But let there be no doubt that the organizing unit of globalization remains the nation state. It remains the nation state. The fundamental building block of it is the nation state. In effect, it is small nations versus big nations. That is what it is. That's the politics of it. So even if the economics of globalization are going in one direction, the politics are going in another direction. That is why the final phase in this journey has to be, in my view, the magnificent step that she has taken, Westbury Records. Step one, intellect at work, Westbury Records. Step two, Westbury Studios. Of course, Bob Marley has shown the way. Tough Gong on Hope Road. You go out into the world, you return to source, and you follow the geometry and the geology of that. I wish to thank Heather for the conversations around this volume. I do not believe that either of us knew where it was going to go. We knew that there was an eruption in Caribbean civilization. It was taking the world in all of its dimensions apart. The world was captured and brought back to a local space. And the geopolitics and culture of that had to be examined and assessed. And it could only be done through multiple lenses or disciplines or perspectives, paradigms. And so we tried not to have a a random, a sortum, a kitchen sink approach, but a kind of architecture that made some kind of coherence. Coherence within the concept of unruliness was important nonetheless. I thank, therefore, Professor Heather for taking this work through production, because I was in transition from Barbados to Jamaica, and I could not find the time to do that final intellectual assessment of prose, context, language, and therefore Heather did all of the editorial work on this collection. The quality of it, I think, is very high, and this is due to her eye for language. Heather, we thank you. I would like, therefore, to end by saying this. UWI academics, especially our younger intellectuals, ought to leave no conversation at peace. We have a responsibility and a duty to interrogate all that we create and produce, all that is said about us, all that we say. This is therefore, in my view, an example of some of the finest writing and thinking of young Barbadian, Caribbean thinkers on a global phenomenon which is ongoing, and therefore there ought to be a second volume. I will not be a part of that second volume, but this is Heather's work. My responsibility is to participate in historicizing the conversation. I wish to thank the University of the West Indies Press for taking this, because we could have gone to any university press in the world and they would have been extremely excited about branding their identity around this conversation. We have to look after our own institutions.
There's just one formality that I'm left to execute. I'm told I must, and that is important. So let me, on behalf of the authors, the writers, the editors, the publishers, thank Mr. Oral Reed and the Office of Security, Ms. Jennifer Hinkson and the Office of the Campus Registrar, Ms. Judy Millington from the Solutions Center, Janet Carew and the staff of the Office of Recruitment and Marketing, Beverly Smith, Sandra Cumberbatch, Stephanie Lopez, Dwayne Haynes, all of the bookshop, Aon Kamisha, who coordinated these activities, as well as being the coordinator of cultural studies, Avonda Reed from Cultural Studies, Ms. Alison Johnson from Humanities Faculty Office, the Office of Public Information, Mr. Brian Elcock and Mark Headley of EMS. I'd also want to thank the ushers, Roseanne Maxwell, Maria Dodson, Jerome Bourne, Rosemary Bell, Wayne Edwards Pyle, Roy Cottle. The Office of Recruitment and Marketing, especially for the facilitating the live stream possibilities. We'd like to thank you, our audience, So on behalf of us, we thank you. On behalf of you, we thank them. Thank you very much.